All right, we're being joined by the Director General, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Muda Yusuf. Good morning, Mr. Yusuf.
Good morning.
Very good to see you. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you as well. Good morning. Morning.
Well, year 2020 has come and gone. Yeah. What would you say were the key lessons for that year?
Yeah, thank you very much. The key lessons were the lessons that were drawn from the key developments during the year. Of course, as you know, we had the COVID experience. There was a lot to learn from the COVID experience, both by government and by businesses. We had the challenge of economic recession, which was connected in a way to the pandemic experience. We also had the experience drawn from the NSAS. Now, starting from the COVID experience and the economic recession, I think one of the key lessons is the lesson of self-reliance and the need for us to diversify the economy. Because at the peak of that pandemic, practically all countries shut their doors. There was no export, there was no import. So nationalism became the in thing. Everybody was putting the country's interests first. So we had a situation where raw materials could not come in, where food imports could not come in. There are some critical products that we need for the economy could not come in. It dawned on us that at that time, if you hadn't had some minimum capacity in the area of self-reliance, it could have been a total collapse of the system. So one critical takeaway or lesson from that was that it is important, particularly in some critical areas like food and drugs and some very basic needs. A country must have some elements of self-reliance, ability to be economically independent. And of course, there was also the lesson of economic diversification. We have been saying this every now and again, we are too dependent on oil. Mm-hmm. And we saw what the COVID did to oil price. Mm-hmm. It was a total crash of oil price. Yeah. We saw what it did to revenue, what it did to our foreign exchange reserves. Mm-hmm. So that further underscored the lesson of diversifying the economy. True. Of course, we have been saying this for so many years. We haven't actually moved in concrete terms in terms of achieving that diversification. So that was another major lesson. Then, of course, there was also the lesson of the need to apply technology. We realized that it was critical to use technology, and that is a lesson that we are taking away with. From the COVID, practically all organizations, businesses, and all of that now recognize more the value of digitization, the value of the use of technology at meetings, in transactions, and all of that. And these are very, very important lessons that we have learned. And it has also helped to actually bring down the cost of operation of many businesses. So even post-COVID, these are lessons that should stick with many organizations because we have since realized the benefits and the kind of cost effectiveness that the use of technology has brought about. Yeah. So, of course, there was also the lesson of innovation and creativity, business flexibility, and the imperative of import substitution. Because the whole experience of 2020 taught us that it is important that we focus on import substitution. We saw what happened to the exchange rate. We saw what happened to the capacity to import. We saw what happened to the foreign exchange market. We saw what happened to the access to foreign exchange. So as much as possible, areas in which we can promote import substitution, I think we should. These are some of the hard lessons. Of course, lessons of innovation, creativity, because we faced an unusual challenge, both as an economy and as businesses. And it brought out, quite a lot of innovation and creativity among investors and even also with the government. So these are some of the lessons I think we are coming away with from the 2020 experience.
2020.
Yeah.
So listening to the President's New Year address, he sounded very committed about economic growth sustainability. So what policies or programs of government would you like to see sustained, and which ones would you like to see changed at this point?
Well, the government has committed to quite a number of reforms, which it would be nice to encourage the government to continue. The first of these was the deregulation of the downstream sector.
Okay.
You know, although it's a fairly difficult, reform to push because of the social environment, because of the dimension of the political economy. But somehow, at least the government has managed to push it up to a point. And it is important because we need that kind of reform to promote investments in the downstream sector. You know, we have been in oil business for close to 50 years now. And you can see what is happening to the downstream sector. It's almost in tatters. The refineries are not working. The pipelines are practically broken down. Nothing is happening in terms of concrete economic investment in the downstream sector. So that reform, if it is sustained with the collaboration and support of the critical stakeholders, I'm sure it will help a great deal. Then we had some steps that were taken around the cost-reflective tariff.
Okay.
The power sector is a major sector, it's a very strategic sector. And over years, we have had very serious issues with that sector. And the fact that the power sector is what it is, it has been affecting productivity, it has been affecting competitiveness, it has even been affecting the capacity of the economy to diversify. So that reform, we expect, will attract more investment, will encourage more private capital, both from within and outside the economy, to come into that sector. So we'd like to see the sustenance of that. Then, of course, the president has signed the budget, and we are seeing the sustenance of the January to December budget cycle.
The budget cycle, yeah.
You know, that is good, for planning, for certainty, and it's also good for the implementation of the budget. When you are sure that every year the budget cycle will run from January to December. So the fact that the government has tried to sustain that, both the executive, the National Assembly, the Budget Office, I think we must commend that initiative. We also like to see that, to continue. Then we saw some steps that were taken last year concerning the petroleum industry bill.
Yeah.
That's a bill that has been in the works for so many years. Yeah. We are hoping that this time around, because we are beginning to see some new momentum being generated around the PIB. And it's a major instrument of reforming the upstream oil and gas sector. And it's also a bill that, if we get right, it's likely to bring in a lot of investment into this economy. So we want to see that through. It started last year. We want to see that sustained. Then in the financial markets, although we have divided opinion on that, we have seen a significant reduction in interest rates. Those who are in the real economy, those who are borrowing for investment, are quite happy with it. In fact, we had some of our members that have said that they were even getting cheaper funds from commercial banks than from development banks. Which is a narrative that is good. When we
because
talk
of some of the policies the central bank
because of some of the policies
place.
of the central bank. So that again, if you can sustain it, a situation where it will be easy to access credit for investments, that is a good thing. Then we also saw the impact of that on the capital market.
Yeah.
The stock market was a major beneficiary
Absolutely.
of that development.
Yeah, investors who couldn't get much returns from the fixed income environment had to move.
They had to move to the stock
market. Yeah.
So that brought a lot of
All right. Let me also take you back to the president's broadcast. He did emphasize on the need to support the youth. He recognizes that the youth of every nation is the future, of that nation. I'm sure you will recall the NSAS protest that took place in 2020. And that NSAS protest is not just about, protesting against police brutality. I mean, there are so many issues there. Joblessness is there. And then World Bank would always tell you that human capital development is key to any nation's economy. Now, looking at what the president has said and talking from a business angle, how do you think, this government can actually, deal with the issues concerning the youth, you know, talk about education, and then when you talk about human capital development, what is the way forward?
Well, what the president said is something that is good. Mm-hmm. But, you know, one thing that we also need to realize is that there's often a gap between what he said and what happens eventually.
That's the thing.
You know, over time, we have had very beautiful speeches being read, promises, that sometimes tends to, you know, inspire some confidence. But down the line, you see that there is no alignment between what is happening practically and what was said in those speeches. But having said that, what he said was good, valid, but what is important is to commit resources to it. Commit resources to education. Because right now, we find a situation where if you look at the primary and secondary levels of education, it's almost becoming a private sector affair.
Yeah.
Especially if you want quality. Yes.
An enterprise. And then, I mean, the private people seem to make a lot of money from it, isn't it?
Of course, once it's become a private sector affair, then it becomes a profit-making venture. The private sector is not in that space for charity.
But that shouldn't be so. Education should be social service.
Exactly. But, you know, the private sector was also filling a vacuum. It was the failure or the shortcomings in government investment in human capital. That is what created that investment opportunity for the private sector to go in there, because there is a huge demand which the government cannot meet.
In other words, any parent who cannot afford to take the child to a private school, then
that is the challenge.
No choice.
Yeah.
So that is to underscore the importance of government investment in education. In other climes where they have an economy that is thriving, where they have very solid human capital, they don't joke with primary and secondary education.
Absolutely.
And there's easy access to it, and quality education for that matter. But this is a completely different story here. If you don't have good money, I mean, we are seeing primary school where people are paying up to 500,000 per session.
Yeah.
Some even more. So what do you make of that in terms of all the children of the poor? So we should not have a society where, because you are not economically empowered, your children cannot have access to even the most basic of education. So it's a question of changing the priority of government. And this is not just about the federal government. It's also about the state governments. Because all of us are already paying the price for the negligence of education. All this problem of insecurity and all of that, if you analyze it properly, you see that there's a relationship between what is happening in the insecurity space and poor investment in human capital.
Yeah, Mr. Yusuf,
So you have when you have a bunch of youths that are feeling hopeless, they cannot. I mean, you see people walking on the street. They ask them, they say, well, it's because their parents cannot pay school fees.
Yeah.
That is why they are walking on the streets.
Mr. Yusuf, hold those thoughts now.
Yeah.
We'll take a break.
Okay.
When we come back, we'll continue. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching Business Morning. We've been discussing with the Director General, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Mr. Muda Yusuf. So, sir, we're in a recession, and we celebrate the fact that the contraction wasn't as bad as was expected. We're optimistic of exiting the recession in the first quarter of this year. And for this to happen, what should be the major priorities of government in 2021?
Well, getting out of recession is a function of the kind of investment environment that we create.
Okay.
Because we are talking about injecting capital into the economy.
Yeah.
We are talking about creating jobs. So we need to generate investors' confidence. So we need to look at those variables that drive confidence in an economy. And there are some variables that are also peculiar to our own environment. The first issue of priority is security.
Okay.
We can see what is happening in the security space right now. We didn't have a good story to tell in 2020. So in 2021, I think we should see a different narrative as far as security is concerned. Because if you have an environment that is not secure, where people are not sure of the safety of lives and property, then you cannot have investment. Although this issue is more pronounced in some parts of the country than others. But what happens to any part of the country invariably affects all the other parts of the economy.
Exactly.
Because it's a single economy.
Exactly.
And all these farmers and things that have been affected primarily now, they're also investors in their own right. Agri contributes about 23% of our GDP. So if we continue this way, we can have a situation where we will have a major crisis with agriculture, a major crisis with food security and all of that. So security is key to engender the confidence of investors. Secondly, we need to normalize the foreign exchange market. The foreign exchange market in 2020 wasn't good enough. There were issues about this multiplicity of rates. There were issues about too many brokers in the system. There were issues of so many parasites taking advantage of premium from one market to the other. There were issues of uncertainty. People could not plan, and investment risk increased. So we need to normalize the market. And one key way to normalize the market is to ensure, as much as possible, a market-driven exchange rate. So that will help, not just about creating confidence. So the government shouldn't interfere
at all in any way?
Well, it's not that the government should not interfere. Yeah. But as much as possible, we should give the market a much broader room, to determine the allocation of resources in the market. We should move away from this culture or this policy or philosophy of something that looks like an administrative allocation of foreign exchange. The NAFEX market, that's the importers and exporters window, for instance, should ideally be purely market-driven. And if there is any need for the central bank to support it, to strengthen it, the central bank can also inject foreign exchange. Into the market. Yeah. We have seen a time in the past where, because of the robustness of the NAFEX market, the I&E window, the central bank even went and bought foreign exchange from the market, because the market was so robust. So we should, in 2021, create a room for the foreign exchange market to inspire much more confidence than what we had in 2020. And one very good advantage of that will also be that it will also help to support the supply side of the foreign exchange market. Because the inflow of forex into the economy is not only through oil. We can have inflows from other sources, from FDIs, from portfolio flows, from diaspora remittances, from export proceeds.
And the FDIs still depend on the security situation.
It depends on the security situation, that is. So it also depends a great deal on the foreign exchange market. The foreign exchange is key, is central to attracting investment and to attracting inflows into this economy. And that will help us to also move away from a purely demand management focus of the foreign exchange market to a focus that will also incentivize supply into the foreign exchange market. So as much as possible, we should normalize the foreign exchange market. Yeah. Then we should also fix our ports. In 2020, our ports was a major source of frustration to investors. Unfortunately, we couldn't do much. There are quite about two major components of this port issue. There is the infrastructure component of the problem. That is the quality of facilities within the ports, the quality of access roads within the ports. And you see a port that doesn't have capacity to handle the volume of trade that we have. These ports, the last time there was a major investment will be over 20 years or more. Between then and now, the economy has grown. The volume of imports and exports have increased. And yet we still have the same capacity. So there's a capacity problem in the ports. But more importantly is the institutional and human problems that we have. That's the challenges investors are having with the documentation, with the customs, with the shipping companies, with the terminal operators, and all of that.
So it makes it expensive to...
It makes it very expensive.
Yeah.
It makes it very cumbersome. And sometimes, because of the pressure this is creates for investors, it also creates an environment for extortion. Because when you are under pressure to quickly exit from this crisis,
anything.
I mean, it's very easy for you to be extorted. And that is what is happening. So we have to deal with these issues of the pause. And one very critical thing that we need to fix in 2021 is the issue of dispute resolution between the customs and the importers.
Yeah.
We cannot have a situation where the accuser is also the judge. It's not fair on those who are operators, economic players in this economy. If there is a dispute about valuation, let us have an independent body that can adjudicate between the customs and the importers. If there is a dispute about classification, let us have an independent body that will take a decision and which will be binding on both parties. Yeah. But what we had in 2020 is a very frustrating experience where the customs will tell you that the value of your good is X. Whereas what you have the invoice, you have everything to say that it is Y. And because they are also chasing revenue, they go for the much higher value. Sometimes these valuations are arbitrary. And if you want to protest, you protest to the same customs service. So you don't get justice. So we are appealing to the government. Yeah. In 2021, let us have a dispute resolution system that is fair, that is transparent, and that is equitable between the customs service and all the economic players in this economy.
All right, Mr. Muda Yusuf, looking at all of this that you have talked about, and I'm sure you did listen to the Minister of Finance react to the recession, and sounded very optimistic that in the first quarter of 2021, we're going to get out of this recession. Even the central bank governor was quite optimistic. So for you, for the business community, are you also optimistic?
Yes, I'm optimistic that we are going to get out of the recession, but not in first quarter. We are looking possibly at the second quarter or the third quarter. Now, we already have a trend in terms of economic performance, which we are hoping will be sustained. We had a major contraction in Q2 2020. It was 6.1%. We had a lesser contraction in Q3, which was 3.62%. We are likely to see a much lesser contraction in Q4, but still a contraction. So that means that the recession will continue. Now, one will have hoped that by first quarter, things will turn around much better. But unfortunately, we had the hangover of the NSAS. We also have this pandemic that is a resurgence of the pandemic. Already in some countries, some steps have been taken, measures have been taken now to lock down some sectors. Even within the country, steps have been taken to restrict movements and to also even lock down some sectors. And some of these sectors are very, very critical sectors to job creation. They are sectors where we have a lot of SME players. So we are beginning to see that. So if that continues, that will further dampen economic performance. It will dampen the tempo of economic activities. So these are some of the things that may slow down the pace of recovery. But we are hopeful that as we progress and with the development of the vaccines and all of that, oil price may also begin to look up, to be much more positive.
Already,
if that happens, that will also help, to accelerate the pace of recovery. So these are the things that makes one feel that, well, 2021 will be much better.
Yeah, particularly with the vaccines coming out.
Exactly, with the vaccines and all of that. And of course, you know how that will impact on commodity prices and how that will invariably impact on our revenue and on our foreign exchange earnings.
Okay, so with the AFCFTA kicking off now, what should we expect to see? What impact would this have on the economy and business going forward in Nigeria?
Well, the ALCTA is a very important development for 2021. Of course, we also need to moderate expectations because a lot of people are thought that by January 1st, you can just carry your cargo and just get out of the country and go and take anything out and bring anything into the economy from any African country. It's not going to happen that way. There are issues of institutional readiness for this thing. And even the CEO of the Secretariat of the CFTA has also said that, that quite a number of the institutions that will drive the process are not quite ready. Not only in Nigeria, in many of the African countries. So it will take time for this thing to effectively take off. But any time it takes off, and hopefully maybe before the middle of this year, it normally presents huge opportunities. Yeah, well, one of the issues there I think they are trying to deal with is the rule of origin. And I'm happy you're here and you deal with some of these business people who are into importation and exportation. So for you, LCCI as an advocacy group, how have you been able to educate your members in terms of the rule of origin? Well, we have had quite a number of sensitization sessions in 2020 and even before then. Since this pronouncement, this discussion around the CFTA started, we have been having discussions and engagements to enlighten members of the private sector, not just our members, even the wider business community. We have had a lot of interaction even with the Ministry of Trade and Investment on this. So there's a lot of education going on, even with the Manufacturers Association, NECA, and NASIMA, and the rest of them. But what is more important is the institutional capacity to enforce the rules. It is one thing to educate people, but it's another thing to enforce it. Because no matter what you say, there will be elements that want to circumvent the rules, to take advantage of whatever situation presents. So the institutional capacity of each of those countries to enforce those rules is what is most significant. Otherwise, the biggest risk to the Continental Free Trade Agreement is the failure or the capacity to enforce the rule of origin. If we are not able to enforce it, and for just to explain, what rule of origin means is that all the items or goods that will be traded within the framework of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement must be goods that are produced in Africa. You know, so that we don't have situations of transshipment where people will bring goods from Asia, from Europe, and all of that, and now begin to trade it within the continent. That is the whole essence of compliance with the rule of origin. And if you don't have a very sound institutional capacity, you know, across the continents, there may be an issue. And I give you an example. Even within ECOWAS, we had a challenge with the rule of origin. Because we have the ECOWAS trade liberalization scheme, where you can trade freely within ECOWAS. And the customs have reported a number of times that there are goods that are relabeled as being produced in West Africa that were not produced in West Africa. So people bring in goods from other places, they relabel it and begin to trade it within the sub-region. So that was a major risk even to ECOWAS, and it was one of the challenges that even the customs were grappling with within the framework of ECOWAS. So that is very key. Then there's also the issue of the legacy bilateral agreements. Many African countries already have bilateral agreements with other countries outside of the continent, you know? And some of these bilateral agreements are trade agreements, which allows for free trade and all of that between their countries and these other countries. So we need to see how we align these bilateral trade agreements with the Continental Free Trade Agreement. Otherwise, there will be a conflict where a country already have maybe a bilateral trade agreement with China, with UK, with the EU, to allow for free movement of goods and all of that. And also that country is a member of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Well, so these are things that we need to align, you know, properly in order to ensure that we get that agreement functioning properly.
Well, this is something that has just started, so I guess we'll continue to learn more about it. Thank you very much, Mr. Muda Yusuf. It's always a pleasure, and it's nice having you this first business week in the new year.
First, yeah.
It's a pleasure.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you.
And Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. And welcome on board.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah.